I would echo that, and that part of the routine would be having designated work time and space so that you don't feel like you're constantly at work because the entire house becomes your work. So having a designated spot in the house, and preferably not having that be in the bedroom, because that's going to interfere with sleep more if your brain starts to pair the bedroom with work and needing to be alert and problem solve, because we're really just fancy rats and we learn by association. And adding to what Starr was saying about the routine and having like an on and an off, it can also be really helpful to have very basic things like making sure you get up, you shower, and wear work clothes, and change out of those work clothes when it's time to switch off, because those seemingly small things can actually go a long way in terms of cueing your brain on when it needs to be on and when it needs to be off. And the other piece that you mentioned was about, you know, trying to get through the day and dealing with emails and things like that. So the productivity element, I think, is worth maybe commenting on, which is that, and then we'll talk about the sleep, but a lot of people are expecting themselves to be just as functional and just as productive as if they're in the office. And we're just not in the same circumstance. This is a new way of doing things. And so even if that was the only problem, even if the only issue was that we transitioned from working in an office to working in a new circumstance, then that would already, we would expect there to be some adjustment period to have to be there. But then on top of that, then this is a pandemic. And so we are constantly being bombarded with threat messages and threat signals about danger. And we just don't concentrate well when we're under fight or flight, or in some cases freeze. And so being realistic about building in breaks, just as Starr was saying about making sure that she takes a lunch break where she goes outside, she has some exercise with the dogs, building in breaks is going to be essential for proper productivity through the day, because we need to be able to down-regulate more frequently than we maybe would at other times. And in those breaks, doing exactly what Starr was saying, if you can go outside, that's a great thing. Exercise naturally down-regulates us, because when we're in fight or flight, then our energy kind of goes up. Our body is preparing to either run or to kind of duke it out. And so if we give our body a healthy discharge for some of that energy, then we can settle and we can be more thoughtful and problem-oriented again when we come back. The other thing that would be really helpful is for people who are isolated, who don't have other people in isolation with them, then reaching out on their breaks, because we're a social species and we need other people, and being alone and completely isolated and without touch actually also activates our fight or flight system. So making sure that we reach out as much as possible during those breaks would also be helpful. And then just to tie in the thing about the sleep, because I'm essentially talking about being able to down-regulate as much as possible, just building it in through the day as part of the schedule. Part of that schedule or the routine, it would be really helpful to have an established evening routine where you unwind, where you don't have news or COVID information just before bed, because that again is going to bombard our system with, oh my God, danger, I'm helpless, I can't do anything. What if, what if, what if? And so we want to make sure that in that last hour and a half, 2 hours before bed, that we're both giving ourselves a little bit of a discharge, so maybe an after dinner walk, for instance, a little bit of an opportunity to get rid of some of that. And if walking isn't your thing, then even doing something like journaling, because that can also provide a release, or some sort of creative endeavor, doing knitting, arts and crafts, that sort of thing. So having some sort of discharge in that wind down period, and then ending with something like meditation or a mantra, or having some sort of soothing music in the background. We know that nature sounds can be very soothing for people as well. And so for a lot of people, then playing an app or a YouTube video of nature sounds while they're winding down and making that part of their routine. And that allows people to settle more so that their sleep quality is better and they're able to fall asleep more easily. Because when we're in fight or flight, we're programmed to not sleep well when we think a bear might come into our room.
That's amazing. I took notes during that, and I will say that every morning I write a little note to myself. I don't know.
Take a deep breath.
Awesome.
So whatever mantra comes in, I kind of do that every day for myself. I try to anyway. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Starr, is there anything you want to add to that, or I can go on to the next question?
No, I think we covered it all. Just, okay. You know, the importance of kind of making the break between home and work is so vitally important.
So there's a question here that I feel might kind of dovetail on that. Can you suggest tips for those who are new to working from home, but also looking for a red flag? So in terms of our own mental and physical health, are there red flags that we should be paying attention to that should signal us to down regulate? I like that term, or look out for.
Did you want to comment on that first, Starr?
I'll let you go first on this one because you probably are better at the red flags.
Yeah, fair enough. So the easiest way to think about it is if we use, because everybody's familiar with this idea of fight, flight, or freeze. So when we're in fight or flight, then we do our best to try to settle or deal with the threat to the best of our ability. That's not always done in an adaptive way. So for instance, one of the ways that we flee might be just to avoid. So we start avoiding interacting with other people, even though now it's all done virtually. We're delaying responding to text messages. We're not reaching out to the people that we had been reaching out to before. So there's some avoidance that's starting to happen. And it can even be, even if you live with other people, then it can even be something as subtle as when we start feeling more threatened and we're getting stuck in it more, then we stop making eye contact the same way that we usually do. So you might notice that your family member isn't really looking at you and holding your gaze the way that they used to. And suddenly you're irritated by how people chew, or you start to bicker with people. So your patience is low. And it's easy when we're in fight or flight because we're so already hyperstimulated. It's easy for us to become overstimulated at levels that we wouldn't before. So suddenly, like the TV being on too loud, or the radio being on too loud, or if somebody, so I have like an 11-year-old is one of my kids, and so if they're playing and they're making weird noises, then normally you're like, oh, isn't that cute, they're playing and using their imagination, and suddenly you're like, oh God, could you just stop, right? So you get irritated by things that normally don't irritate you. Or you might be engaging in other forms of avoidance, like you're getting really caught up in blame, because blame is a very human way that when we feel powerless, that we try to reassume some sort of control. Because if it's their fault, well then, you know, that's not my problem. But if it's my fault, then suddenly I can do something about it. And we take responsibility for things that we maybe can't control. So we start getting really angry with people who aren't respecting the social distancing rule, for instance, or who are going out, or we get really mad at businesses that haven't closed, and we get stuck in that. So, you know, having an emotional response isn't a big deal, but if we find that we're getting stuck in it and it's starting to make us feel weaker, then that's probably an indication that something is going on, or that we start indulging in things that normally give us a little bit of comfort, but we're indulging in them a lot. So it could be, you know, peanut butter or any kind of food. It could be drinking. It could be working. For a lot of people, their sense of mastery and purpose comes from work. And so when they feel helpless, then they may be prone to working extended, longer hours, because that is where they actually feel they get some control, when they're in this circumstance where they have no other control, where there's so much uncertainty. And then, of course, sleep is one of the big things that gets disrupted. So that would be an early sign that something is not okay. So if I were to summarize that, I would say it would be sleep, our eating can change, and our relationships and tolerance for relationships and how we interact with them would change. I can say more, but I'll stop. If you want me to elaborate, I could talk about any one of these questions for like an hour.
This is good. I have a few more questions. I have a question from the floor. and Starr, if you just jump in, maybe we'll start with you, Starr, for this one. So as an employee who has been temporarily laid off, how do you deal with feelings of rejection, not valued as a team member, etc., regardless if it is an organization's financial decision? So temporary, this statement rings true to me. So temporary still feels like permanent in so many ways. So that statement alone, we know this is temporary, but it doesn't, day to day, it doesn't feel that way. So, the big thing there is, how do you deal with feelings of rejection and not being valued as a team member? I think that's a powerful question.
I think one of the things that we remind ourselves of, my team, when we meet every day, we remind ourselves that we're all in this together. And that gives us, and it gives me, a sense that I'm not alone. We talk openly about our feelings, more so than we used to probably during the day in the office. If someone had a really stressful evening, we start the call with that and we listen to them, and then we say, we understand, the same thing happened to me, or the same thing's happening in my house. And I think feeling rejection because of something that's completely beyond your control is a horrible feeling to be experiencing. And I think one of the things that can really help is looking at the positives in your life. We hear a lot about gratitude, and thinking of the things that you're thankful for and that you have gratitude for can really go a long way.
Nice.
Can I add to that?
Please, yes, please.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I agree with Starr. I think it's also important to recognize that we are social. We are biologically programmed to connect with one another, and that we are going to be more hurt by a perceived rejection from a circumstance where we felt we invested, right? So if someone who we did not invest in was like, I don't like you, and we're like, well, that's not a big deal. But if someone that we care deeply about, or someone who we've worked to create a relationship with, rejects us in some way, and it doesn't even have to be getting fired, that's a pretty big example, or being laid off. It could be even something much less, like not being invited to an office lunch, then that would still be hurtful. So I think it's important to remember that when there is a rejection like that, because there's no two ways about it, right? That there needed to be a cut, and we can understand rationally that this needed to happen, but it's still, because we're biologically social, it's still going to hurt. And so acknowledging and making room for that to hurt, and for it to be okay that you're hurt, and that you might even be angry about it, because, well, you'll probably have questions about why me and why not this other person, and all of that is normal. It's helpful, though, to make room to discharge it. So not to avoid it, not to put blinders on and be like, oh, well, I understand because it's the pandemic and everybody's going through stuff, because that's denying your actual experience. And then all of that emotion is going to get kind of stuck inside you, and it's going to need to come out in other ways. And we know that feelings are balls of energy. That's why when we're angry, it makes us want to do something, right? We want to discharge it. And if we're sad and we have a good cry, then we feel tired after. And so it's important to allow room for those feelings to come up, instead of being really understanding or detaching or numbing, because then we don't get to move forward from it. It's just going to be like a scab that anytime it gets brought up, then it hurts again. So some process of dealing with those emotions would be really helpful. So some of the suggestions that I would have would be journaling is a great one, or doing some sort of creative endeavor while you're thinking about that. And also brainstorming. So you don't have to be like a writer or a journaler to do this. You can even just brainstorm. So write the word like laid off in the middle of a page, and then see what are all of the other words that pop up in association with that. And that's going to give you, it's a little bit of mind mapping. It's going to give you an idea of what this means to you and why it might get sticky for you. So it's giving you some direction about what to lean into, so to speak. And then when those feelings come up, if there's sadness, then just remember to validate for yourself. It's not going to be that way all the time, even though, as both Starr and Becky have acknowledged, we do have this tendency that we turn impermanent things into permanent things. So if you're dealing well with the pandemic, then you probably have it in your head like, oh, I'm going to do well in this pandemic. And then we have a couple of bad days and we feel like a failure. Or we feel like we're struggling in the pandemic and it feels like it's never going to get better. And then, you know, we adjust because that's what we do. And we keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. We can't just accept it. So this tendency for things to feel like they're permanent and it's going to be long-standing is normal, and recognizing that that happens. But that it is actually reminding ourselves consciously that it is transient and it's going to get better. And one of the ways we can help it get better is by giving it some sort of room to process. So one of the things that I really love doing, and I do this myself as well, so I'm preaching what I'm teaching. No, teaching what you know what I mean. I'm not great with expressions, but if you have any kind of pent up feelings, then taking a ball or rotting fruit and chucking it at the ground as hard as you can. And if you can, taking the ball and holding it overhead and just throwing it down repeatedly. Because one of the things that happens is when we exercise to a point where we have an increase in intensity in our body, where we start to fatigue, then that's connecting us to our bodies emotionally, and that makes it harder for us to avoid our emotions. And so it physically connects us to our body. It allows us to process it and allow for a discharge so it doesn't get stuck inside us. And when we're throwing the ball, I mean, that's fun, but it's even more fun if you have any kind of rotting fruits or vegetables to chuck it at a tree. Because when we're angry, then we want something to get destroyed. Like, that's just part of the process. And so seeing the splat of like a rotting apple on a trunk of a tree is very gratifying. But my caution is that if you have really bad aim, throw it at the ground. You're just going to get so frustrated throwing it at a tree and missing. So those would be some suggestions.
I love that. My mother has compared me to like a border collie, because she'll talk to me. She's in Bermuda, so she'll talk to me on the phone, and she can tell by my mood and anxiety level if I haven't gone for a run, because she can tell when I need that release, right? Yeah. Now it's getting trickier to do that now with runners are the devil now. If you're on Twitter at all, you can see that runners you got to keep your distance with that. So. But that's great. That's great. Those are great tips. And maybe just, we have a question here. It's, should managers be reaching out to their employees to ask them about their mental health and ensure they're not overworking at difficult times? I'm a manager. I'm trying to reach out to people, my team, on a regular basis. I'm not perfect at it. What questions can we ask, and what changes can we do for our employees to make if they're struggling, to make it easier on them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can start with that one and just say that I think it's critically important that managers reach out to their employees right now, for sure. I think I mentioned a little earlier, we do a video call every morning, and it's the best part of our workday because we get to feel normal. We get to see each other's faces and hear each other's voices and see who might still be in their bathrobe, and make sure that we, ask them a few more questions about how they're feeling. And today, when we had our video call, I made sure to tell everyone at 12:30, it's computers off, and don't look at your computer again until Monday morning. This is what we need to do. And it's vitally important. And a few people said, but I, and that was my cue as a manager to say, no, absolutely not. We all need this time. I need this time. I need this time to say, no, I'm not going to worry about work. I'm not going to worry about budgets. I'm not going to worry about things that aren't getting done because I'm at home and not at the office. And I think a manager saying that to their employees is very, very important, because so many of us, give our all to work and want to do a good job at work, that we feel like we really need to step up during these times. So I think it's really important that managers connect directly with employees. If you can't do a video call, do a phone call as opposed to just a text. because you can get a lot more from a person when you hear how they sound, how they say things. And if people are struggling, be vulnerable yourself as a manager. I don't pretend that I've got this all pulled together in front of my team. If anything, I think it makes me a stronger leader to actually say, you know what, I had a really, really crappy night last night. I woke up in the middle of the night and I was scared. And, I wasn't at my computer at 8:30 this morning. I didn't get there till quarter after 9. And that's okay, because we're all just human and we're all just trying to get through this. And I think by saying stuff like that as a leader, we're allowing our employees to be people.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that. So we know from the research that one of the elements that promotes resilience in a community is the leadership and the communication with leadership. And so by a leader, both checking in and what they check in about, right, will change what the communicated values are of that organization. So if you're checking in to see how are people finding the productivity when they go home, like working from home, that's sending one message. If you're checking in and saying, I just wanted to know, how are you coping? How are you doing with this?
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, how are you finding that's impacting productivity? That's a different message. I do think that there's no right way, and I was saying this to start before we started, there's no right way to do the pandemic. And so ideally, we do have people in leadership positions who are checking in and asking what their experience of the pandemic is. And I think that's a really important point, because this pandemic is causing so many varied reactions and experiences already for people. So for instance, in one household, then there might be one person whose business is now bankrupt because they were a travel agent. And, the other person, they had to lay people off, but now they're doing the work of all of the people they laid off, and they're needing to pull 16-hour days. And so even in one household, you can have such completely dramatically different experiences of the pandemic. And so I don't think that we can assume that other people's experience is similar to ours, because there are some people for whom this is working out, with some positives, and then they feel guilty even about that, right? Because if the rest of our tribe is crying and we're laughing, then we feel like we're doing something wrong or something is out of sync. And so making sure that as leaders, we're asking what are the people we're connecting with, what their experience of the pandemic has been and of coping, and asking them what support they would need. How can we help them most? And I think because of that element of when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, then we can't process information the same way that we normally do. Then that flexibility and modeling being flexible as well as forgiving with ourselves, just as Starr was talking about, maybe I didn't have a good night, maybe I didn't get on the computer at the time that I normally would, and being open and modeling that gives them permission to also be flexible with themselves, be compassionate with themselves, and also leadership asking for what they need in the face of the stressors that they're facing, and empowering their staff to also ask for what they need, acknowledging that it may be different. So for instance, Starr was saying, no screens, switch the computer off, and allowing them to do that. For some people for whom, let's say they have a spouse who is a healthcare provider and is going into the hospitals and is on the front line with COVID every day, then the healthiest thing for them may actually be to work more in the short term. Because if they don't have the bandwidth to do journaling or emotion processing, if that's not where they're at, then in the short term, then that may be how they need to kind of cope as a way of dealing with this. And so we want to make sure that we're empowering people to do what they need within reason, right? We don't want anybody working, excessive hours continuously, but we want to make sure that there's enough wiggle room that we are empowering people to ask for what they need and what they want.
That's good feedback. That's really good. That's great. I just want to remind everyone that they can write, if they have a question for either Starr or Dr. Wilson, we have a question and answer box, so please feel free to use that. And for now, I'm just going off questions that we've already gathered, so I'm just going to keep going because this is really, I'm so glad to be here. I will say that I'm learning so much. Just on how to be gentler to myself and also to start thinking about sometimes it's hard to think what other people are going through in their own houses. Everyone's house is different, and there's mothers out there, there are single parents, there are, people have been laid off, and we're all going through a different thing, and to try and be as empathetic as possible, I think is really important. So here's a question. What supports are available now, and how do you use these supports without feeling guilty? When you hear something like, we're so lucky to have jobs and our health, I hear, I just got off the phone with my sister and I said, I shouldn't complain because I've got a job right now and I've got a house and I've got my health, but I still have moments where I feel like I'm grieving or sad and struggling. So what supports are out there for us?
On our website right now, Becky, we have a list of COVID-19 supports that are available to people. And there are 1-800 numbers, the numbers you can call or websites you can visit. And the other thing that I always suggest and am a huge proponent of is EFAP. So if you have access to employee and family assistance programming through your workplace, don't hesitate to call. That's why those people are there. And you can call them and talk about just about anything. It's not just about mental health concerns. It can be about trying to figure out your finances if you're finding it difficult to make ends meet because your financial situation has been changed by the pandemic. It can be legal questions. It can be, family questions. So I'm a strong proponent of reaching out to EFAP. And I think we also should be using our own personal supports and just being a little more open and honest with people. We say all the time at the Mental Health Foundation, self-care is not selfish. And I think so many of us spend so much of our time worrying about others and taking care of others, whether it's taking care of our organization or taking care of our children. Dr. Wilson mentioned she has an 11-year-old. You have 2 other kids too, so you have 3 under the roof. I have my 17-year-old here. She's trying to work on her pre-cal homework and I can't help her. I can't even come close to helping her. But the best way I can help her is to take care of myself. So I think looking for support, look within a little too and give yourself permission to take the dogs for a walk, to say, I'm going to sit down and read a book. I'm going to go out and sit on the deck and enjoy the feeling of the sun on my face. I'm going to eat well. I'm going to stay on a regular routine. It's so vitally important to get support from within.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I would just add that there was a comment in that question about guilt, like how do I access resources and not feel guilty about it? So it can be helpful to understand that, at least the way that I think about guilt, based on my training and experience, is that guilt actually comes from caring. And it's an attempt to protect and repair. So we don't feel guilty unless there's some underlying kind of caring that is happening for other people, just because we are part of the same species and we want well for one another, right? It hurts to see other people suffering. And so recognizing that that guilt is coming from a place of caring, which is actually connecting us to the collective suffering that is happening right now. And that it's also helpful to recognize that it doesn't matter if we're drowning in 3 feet of water or 30 feet of water. The experience of drowning is the same. So people comparing like, well, maybe I shouldn't access those resources because there are people worse off and I still have a job or I still have my health, and so I should probably leave it for other people. If you are struggling, then you're the person who needs it. And we tend as humans, we tend to not acknowledge when we're struggling until it gets to a point where it's actually really really pronounced and we can't ignore it anymore. We like to put our blinders on and pretend that things are fine until all of a sudden they're really not fine. And so if you're at the point where you're thinking, maybe I should find out what resources are available, then you probably are one of the people for whom the resources are intended. And you matter as much as every other person who is in line for that resource to access it. And when you kind of notice those feelings of guilt coming up, then remembering that metaphor with the 3 feet of water and 30 feet of water, right? It doesn't matter if you're someone who has been directly affected by COVID, you've had a loss related to COVID, or if you lost your job and you have some income stability, but it's still devastating because the way that you knew your life was going to be has changed. One of the definitions of trauma that I really like is that trauma is when you thought your life was going in this direction, and then boom, something happens and it's gone off in this other direction. And because of that sudden veering to one way that you did not expect and did not plan for, then you need to revisit your values, your roles, how you do things. And so essentially, based on that definition of trauma, then we are experiencing globally a collective trauma. And we all thought our lives, like I can tell you, I run many groups, and we did groups at the beginning of 2020, and this was not in any of them, right? There was no pandemic planning in January in terms of expecting it to have this kind of impact this quickly and this profoundly. And so we are experiencing this collective trauma, and in a million different ways, and in some it will be, that expression, death by 1,000 paper cuts. It'll be so like people's microwaves will break and then their refrigerator will and their dog will get a limp, and it might not be one major thing, but it is going to be equally destabilizing because they can't access the resources to get their stuff fixed. They can't go to the vet to get their dog the care they need, right? So in summary, then I would say that remembering that guilt comes from love and a desire to protect and repair helps us feel connected to everybody else instead of getting stuck beating ourselves up. The other is that remembering that 3 feet of water versus 30 feet of water, struggling is struggling. The content doesn't matter. If you're recognizing that you're struggling, then you absolutely get to access those resources. And then you were asking about what resources are out there. So what Starr referenced is those are fantastic, and I 100% agree with that. I would also encourage you to connect with any communities you're a part of. So if you are, part of a work email group, then see if anybody wants to have a social night. Or if you are part of a bridge group, then you can see if they want to set up like a telephone calling system if you're not comfortable with the video conferencing. So connecting to the communities that we're already a part of can be quite meaningful for us. And it allows us, and it means, but it is asking of us, right? Because it means we need to show up in a way that we don't normally show up with those people. And that can feel very vulnerable, and we're not sure how it's going to go. But quite honestly, this is a pandemic and all bets are off. So nobody really knows what the best way to do things is right now. And so this is a great time to experiment, like a fantastic time. And so you might as well kind of put feelers out there, and the worst that will happen is they won't respond. The other, a few examples of connecting with communities that you already have. So I'm a huge proponent of exercise, as you may have picked up from before, because it's one of the single biggest things we can do for our mental and physical health in the short term and in the long term. So, and I believe in this so much that like I own a wellness center as well as a medical clinic called Dynamic Wellness. So we have that, but we also, just like many other gyms or exercise outfits like Orange Theory or Evolve, then or CrossFit gyms, they have set up communities where you can do challenges online, where you can check in, Facebook groups, that sort of thing. Those are also really meaningful and really impactful. And if you can piggyback a community that you're already a part of, or join a community. People are going to be extra open right now. There is nothing like trauma to bring certain people together. We go one of two ways. We either kind of totally isolate and don't want anything to do with people, but the people who are still trying to reach out, they're extra open. And so this is a good time to also join one of those communities. And if you can piggyback something that is going to give you socializing and exercising and connection, then that's a really high return on investment. So that would really, really pay off.
Yeah, I love that. We've been, I haven't been consistent about this, but we've been doing Zoom meetings, a few of us, and doing the Orange Theory workout, and we do that a couple times a week, and then we're suffering together as we would at the gym, and it's keeping us a level of accountability. So I don't want to, we're going to run out of time. There's so many questions, but I have a question in the question and answer box. So how do you suggest navigating communicating with someone that is hyper-focused on COVID-19 when small doses seem to be a better approach for your personal mental health? So it sounds like someone's living with someone who's really immersed in it, and it might have its toll on their partner. So how do you, I guess, gently, or even maybe not gently, how do you address that?
From my point of view, I would say it's kind of like when we tell people to limit their screen time and limit their media time. You could liken it to that. You know, if someone is always focused on talking about COVID-19 and the negativity and the number of cases and the number of deaths, I think it's quite all right for you to say, you know what, I'm having a difficult time dealing with this, and for me, it's best if I limit my intake of COVID-19 information to when the Prime Minister talks at 12:15, when the Premier and Dr. Strang talk at 3 o'clock, and then maybe one other period throughout the day. And other than that, it's not healthy for me. It's not working for me. I think you're well within your rights to say that. We would say it on behalf of our children if someone was exposing our children to a barrage of information all the time. And I think that we should be able to say it on behalf of ourselves too.
I would agree with that. There's a couple of ways that we could communicate that to make it more likely that the other person is going to be open to receiving that feedback. So if we start with validating by saying, I totally get why you would be so focused on all of the COVID stuff because it's all around us all the time. And you don't have to say this part, but I would, because this is my area. It's helpful to understand that we biologically have a negativity bias. We are programmed, and our brains are programmed to take in and pay closer attention to potential threat than good things. So for instance, it's more important for us to remember that the purple berry almost killed us than that the green berry was delicious. And so we right now are going to have extra pull to all of this danger information that we're getting from all of these news media and social media and every conversation essentially. And so it's easy to get sucked into it. And because it's like panic inducing, it feels like there's a lion in the room with us all the time. And it doesn't seem like the right thing to do to take our eyes off the lion, right? Like that feels counterintuitive. So just in your own words, validating, like, I get it. I get how easy it is to get sucked into that and how scary it is. And that maybe if you consume every bit of information that you can, that maybe is giving you some sense of control over this, like you can predict or, you know, help yourself or help your family. I've got to say though, I've noticed for me, when this happens, and then this is where you would put in what's called an I message. So the components of an I message are when you, and then you say specific behavior. So when you watch COVID news constantly without very many breaks in the day, I feel, and then you insert the feeling. And it has to be a feeling word. It's not I feel like, I feel that. It's I feel stressed, I feel hurt, I feel angry because, and then you explain your point of view. So because I feel like I'm never getting a break and I want to be able to support you, but this is actually hurting me and then I can't support you. It's making me want to avoid you. It's making me want to stay away. and in the future, and then you ask for what you want. In the future, if you're going to continue to engage with COVID stuff as much as you are, and if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. But can we talk about how we can limit my exposure to it? So maybe you and I only talk about it twice a day, or maybe you listen to that with headphones on so that I'm not around it all the time. And then if you think that it's actually harming them as well, then you can do what I call a reflect and wonder. So a reflect and wonder is, I'm noticing that you're watching a lot of COVID, and that when you're watching a lot of COVID stuff, you're getting very angry. I wonder, is that the healthiest thing for you to be doing right now? And using an iMessage, so just to recap, an iMessage is when you specific behavior, I feel, feeling word, because explaining your point of view, and in the future, this is what I would like. So using an iMessage format, it's starting with a specific situation. So we want to know what the person has to say about that situation, instead of saying you always this or you never that, right? So it keeps people engaged without tipping them into that fight or flight right away. And then saying I feel is a way of, because we're social, by adding in the feeling, you're going to keep them engaged. If I start with I'm so mad at you, then the person could right away go into fight or flight, and they don't even know what we're mad about, but they might not be able to hear it anymore. So you start with the specific situation, then you share the feeling, then you share your perspective. Because if they can understand where it's coming from, you might just be coming at this in two totally different ways. And then giving an idea or a suggestion of what you would like to do about it moving forward, what you would need, is also opening a conversation so that it doesn't feel like this is like a hopeless scenario that you're never going to be able to move past, right? So you're starting them off with, and this is one idea that I have, what do you think? And then the reflect and wonder, because we're social, but we really don't like being told what to do. I don't know if you've ever tried to tell a toddler what to wear when they were capable of choosing their own clothes, but it doesn't go very well. And we're basically all like that. So when someone offers us unsolicited advice, we're a little bit like that toddler who's being told what to do, and we naturally become a bit defiant. So we don't want to go at that person by saying, you're watching too much COVID, and you know what you need to do? You need to stop. You need to limit it to 2 times a day, because they're not going to be very receptive to that, just because that's how we are. We have this natural defiance streak. And so coming at the issue from this is what I'm noticing, and I'm wondering how this is impacting you. I'm wondering what an alternative might be. It's a more gentle way that will allow the other person to stay engaged with that conversation without becoming defensive.
I think you might have just saved some marriages. I don't know. This could be a urban myth, but I heard that in Wuhan, China, divorce rates are up like 20%. So this might be a key. I wrote it down. I hope other people did too. That's good. That's good advice.
If anybody wants, I have a worksheet related to this on our clinic website. So our clinic website is Inspired Living Medical. And we have a resources section in which we have some meditations, which are helpful. But we also have, I think it's called helpful worksheets. And one of the worksheets is building, I think it's called the Building Solutions worksheet. Oh, and so it actually gives you a list of how to do an iMessage, common shortcomings of it. And I think it has reflect and wonder on there as well. It also has this extra little box that is really helpful, where when you're thinking about it before you go into the conversation, you ask yourself, what are the facts and what are the assumptions I'm making in this conversation? Because sometimes we assume that they know where we're coming from, and so we personalize it. So it could be that, well, they see that it's making me so upset and they're doing it anyway. But that would be an assumption, and we can see that more clearly when we do that worksheet.
Neat. What we'll do, Sandra and I will gather up the resources that we've talked about today for sure, and email them to everyone that was on this webinar, just so we can share those resources. We have about 9 minutes left, and there's 2 more topics that I wanted, and maybe this is part 1 of a 2-part series, you guys, because this is fantastic information. I'm finding it. Well, there's 2 things I wanted to talk about. One would be alcohol, and one is about being balanced as a parent. So I think the parent one might be more more relevant, but and there's a lot of questions around this too. So like, what effects do you see COVID-19 and having children's being at home and parents maintaining a work-life balance while still being a parent? I saw something on Facebook that's you have your profession, you have you're a mother or a parent, and there's teachers, and you can't be all three at the same time. And I'm not a parent, but that really hit home with me. You can't be all those three things at once. So I realize there's no sound solution for that, but is there any advice or support that you guys would like to give to our people today?
My number one tip would be give yourself a break. Give yourself a break. You don't have to win the Employee of the Week award and the Mother of the Year award and the Teacher of the Year award. We can't be our best at everything. And I think that, like Dr. Wilson said, we're dealing with something that we've never dealt with before. So there are going to be hiccups and hurdles that we are going to encounter. And we have to just accept the fact that it's a learning curve for all of us, and we can't do everything perfectly. So don't be so hard on yourself and give yourself a break. That would be my number one. One of the members of my team, we have a small team at the foundation where there are just 6 of us. Her twin boys turned 5 years old yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, normally that would be a huge family celebration and a beautiful cake made by their grandmother that would be consumed by the whole family and friends. And she had to figure out a way to make it all work and still make it special while she was doing her work. And her husband was doing his work. And she made a couple cakes, and they did a little Zoom meeting with her parents who had also baked a cake, and they all ate their cake together with the boys. And you know, they made the best of it. Is it going to be the birthday that the kids remember as the best birthday ever? No, but was it a wonderful birthday where they were surrounded by love and, you know, the closeness and affection of their family? Absolutely.
I would agree with Starr that the best thing we can do for our children, and as Starr mentioned, I have 3 children, I have 3 sons. The best thing we can do for our children is to take care of ourselves, because kids pick up, it's like the leadership conversation we had earlier. They pick up on and they model what they see. And so if we want our family to be at our best, then as parents, then we actually have to model doing the things that keep us well, keeping a schedule, exercising, making time to socialize, prioritizing eating healthy food, making sure that we do have some time to connect, family time to connect. So there's our clinic, or I've put out 3 videos that are kind of coping with pandemic issues, and one of them was around parenting in the pandemic, and it's geared primarily towards people with younger kids, but the concepts actually apply to everybody. And so one of them is around eye contact. So eye contact is grounding for people, and particularly for kids. So, you know, we don't have to have everything figured out, but build in some time to have eye contact with the kids in your home. And it can be silly. It can be staring contests or blinking contests. And the other is having physical contact, because again, we're social, and that's one of the ways that we soothe and we downregulate. And so you don't have to have it all figured out, but maybe you make sure that when you're sitting on the couch, you know, vegging and mindlessly watching another cartoon with them, that you're cuddled up with them and you're touching them, you're touching their hands, you're massaging their feet, you're giving them a snuggle. Or maybe you play fight with them more, if that's, you know, one of the things that happens in your home. The next one is having some sort of physical discharge. So make sure that, and you don't even have to be present for it. If you have like a yard where they can go and run, or where you can be on the front porch doing some sort of work and they're running around, but building into your schedule and their schedule an opportunity for the kids to discharge some of that energy, because that will make everybody's life better. You will be able to do your work better with fewer interruptions. They will be able to regulate themselves better, because exercise has the same impact on us as it does on them. And so they're also amped up because their parents and caregivers are amped up. And if they don't have a discharge, a physical discharge for that, it's going to show up in other ways, and they're going to bicker, and they're going to start getting into trouble, and they're going to be climbing things that they shouldn't and making potions that they shouldn't. Having eye contact built into the day, having some sort of physical contact built into the day, a physical discharge built into the day, and then some sort of way of making it not always serious. So don't just be a worker and then a mom who asks about homework. Did you get your homework done? Has your math been done? Do you need help with your history? Because you need to make sure that there's play. There are two things that really kind of boost attachment. One of them is consistency and safety. And the other one is play, because play is a little bit like steroids for attachment, because we need creativity and connection to do it. So be silly with your kids. I made a scavenger hunt for my kids, and they're like older and I'm lame in their eyes. They're like 16, 14, and 11. But I made a scavenger hunt for cheesy jokes where we hid cheesy like dad jokes. Like, these are the kinds of jokes that we would do. It was things like, what do you call cheese that isn't yours? Nacho cheese. So it was like that caliber joke that I hid in different parts of the house, and then we went looking for them. So it can be anything that's being playful. It can be imaginary games. It can be watching funny YouTube videos with your teenagers, but doing something that is just not serious, that is not about COVID, that is not about school, that is not about that you lost your job or they can't have prom, but that is just fun. And then the last tip around that is doing things that involve regulating our breathing together. So that sounds kind of weird, but anything that allows us to regulate our breathing is grounding and soothing for us. And so activities that do that are things like meditating. Box breathing is one where you kind of breathe in for a count of 4, breathe out for a count of 8, breathe in for a count of 4, breathe out for a count of 8. And you do that repeatedly while imagining kind of drawing a box. And anything in particular where you breathe out for longer than you breathe in presses on the vagus nerve, which is responsible for our calming system. And so it's going to help people calm down. And when we're feeling safer, then we're more likely to be able to connect. So some of those other activities are things like blowing bubbles, blowing up balloons, playing instruments like kazoos or recorders. I recommend that happens outside. It gets loud inside. And blowing up like paper bags even, then those are all things that if you can build in some time to just, let's just breathe for a minute. You know, it's a long day. Or singing. Oh my God, singing is a huge one because you have to breathe out for longer. And it's a way that we sync up our nervous systems very quickly. So singing, you know, silly songs, or even just their favorite Billy Talent, song. So singing together can be a way to do it. So you don't have to have it all figured out as a parent. As Starr was saying, like, be compassionate with yourselves. We're not going to have it all. But being able to pick a few of those things to make sure that you're building into your day will go a really long way. So if you're going to need to squeeze it in, then choose the things that are really high return on investment.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. We're at 2 o'clock as my computer just yelled at me. That's my cue to take a break every hour to just say, okay, it's 2 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock, it's my attention. So we're almost out of time. So I really appreciate Dr. Wilson for your time, and Starr, it was wonderful to have you both here. I do think that we should do this again, and maybe you guys can hang on the line afterwards. But I appreciate everyone attending and the questions asked. We've got webinars, like I mentioned at the beginning, almost one every day, and they're on our website and they're free to attend, and lots of great, from banking to labor laws to everything we've got going on. So please take a look on our website. And this has been recorded, so we're happy to share that as well, along with the resources that Starr and Dr. Wilson talked about today. So we'll share that with everyone. So really appreciate you guys being here, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.